It began with a lie. The greatest weapon America possessed in the dark years of 1942 was not steel. It was not a bomb, waiting heavy in a cold hangar bay. It was a man, and his sanity was peeling away, day by day, word by decrypted word. This war was fought in the silence. It was fought 30 feet beneath the granite of Washington, D.C., where the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fear. Fear, metabolized and exhaled like cheap cigarette smoke. Major Elias Vance hated the bunker. He felt the weight of the city above him, the trolley cars vibrating through the bedrock, the muffled, ignorant sound of freedom continuing its clumsy, wasteful existence. Down here, they were breathing the coming apocalypse. The lamps were fluorescent, sickly yellow, buzzing low like trapped hornets. They cast hard, unforgiving shadows on the stacks of paper surrounding him. Japanese characters piled into impossible columns, thousands of pages of nonsense, meaningless, until Vance touched them. He was the engine of this place, a cryptographer, a monster built for pattern recognition. Vance hadn't slept for 4 days. The sleep deprivation was deliberate. It sanded the edges off the conscious mind. It let the pure mathematical terror seep in. He needed that madness. He needed to be beyond the rules. The war demanded it. His tie was loose. His uniform coat lay crumpled near the steel door, a forgotten skin. He worked in the pale light of the single desk lamp, his face shining with sweat, even though the bunker temperature was set to a punishing, regulated cold. The biting chill was necessary. It kept the calculating machines from overheating. It kept Vance sharp. He dragged a hand across the desk. The desk was steel, scarred by decades of frantic calculation. The tips of his fingers came away blackened with graphite and the ghost of cheap wartime ink. This entire room was a cage, a fortress built to contain the impossible problem. The problem had a name, JN-25, the Japanese Navy's operational code. They called it unbreakable, and for months they were right. Every U-boat sinking, every troop transport lost, every island falling into enemy hands, all of it rooted in the inability to read the enemy's mail. The Japanese wrote in ghosts. They fought the war of the shadows, and America was blind. Vance was brought in when the losses became catastrophic. He wasn't a military man in spirit. He was a mathematician, pulled screaming from his ivory tower and thrown into the fire. He was a weapon of pure intellect, unconventional, volatile, brilliant. The military hated his methods. They wanted procedure. They wanted a textbook solution. Vance offered them only obsession. He saw numbers where they saw chaos. He saw the beautiful, rigid structure beneath the noise. He leaned back, the metal chair groaning in protest. He took a drag from a cigarette, Virginia tobacco harsh on the throat, and watched the smoke rise toward the ceiling. It layered the room in a fine, choking haze. He had broken it. Not the code itself, not completely. But the system, the beautiful, arrogant structure the Japanese commanders had trusted. Vance found the flaw in the human mind that created the cipher, the repetitive pattern, the laziness inherent in genius. He knew where the fleets were going. He knew the dates, the times, the tonnage, but knowing was the easy part. The dilemma was the trap that had driven good men mad before him. It was the reason Major Vance was already being watched, the reason his own superiors had standing orders to terminate his access, to throw away the weapon, if he showed the slightest sign of cracking. The dilemma was credibility. If Washington suddenly knew too much, too cleanly, the enemy would know the code was compromised. They would change the cipher in 24 hours, and the entire intelligence apparatus would return to darkness. Everything would be lost. To survive, the intelligence had to be disguised. It had to look like luck. It had to look like a sacrifice. Vance looked at the stack of paper beside him. It held the operational plan for the movement of 4 heavy carriers toward a point in the Central Pacific. The target was Midway. The Japanese were coming for the last key American foothold. If Midway fell, the war was over. The Pacific would become a Japanese lake. He knew the attack date. He knew the direction of approach. The orders needed to be sent out, countermeasures deployed, but they could not simply sail the entire American fleet directly to the interception point. That was clean intelligence. That was the death of the cipher. Vance had to invent a plausible reason for the US fleet to be in that precise spot, at that precise time. He had to manufacture a chaotic engagement that would fool the enemy into thinking their cipher remained secure. He had to send hundreds of American sailors to a fake disaster. He had to feed the machine American blood to hide the wound he had inflicted on the Japanese mind. This is the cost of victory. The thought was a rasp in his throat. The burden was immense. He wasn't just solving the code. He was rewriting fate. He was choosing who lived and who died, simply to protect the secret of how he knew. The secret was more valuable than the lives it cost. He slammed his fist against the steel desk. A dull, sickening thud. The cigarette ash scattered across the schematics. "Sir?" The voice was Lieutenant Commander Ellis, the duty officer. Ellis was solid, reliable, and terrified of Vance. Ellis was the leash the brass kept on the unpredictable weapon. "Nothing," Vance snapped. His voice was raw, unused. Ellis stood in the doorway, framed by the institutional grey paint. "We have a priority drop, Major, from Station Alpha." Vance didn't move. He felt the tension seize his jaw. Station Alpha was the listening post that intercepted the most obscure, difficult transmissions, the messages sent directly by the Imperial Fleet commanders. "Bring it," Vance ordered. Ellis approached cautiously, placing the slick, damp bundle of teleprinter paper on the desk. The paper was cold to the touch. The message was short, a scramble of 5-digit groups topped by the header. "Urgent priority, Imperial Fleet Command." Vance picked up the sheets. They smelled faintly of ozone and sweat. The numbers marched across the page, rigid and meaningless. He already knew what it was. Midway confirmation. But there was something else. A supplementary message, a secondary objective. The true stakes buried deep within the noise. He started working. He didn't use the massive Hollerith punched card machines or the standard decryption matrices. He used a pencil, a slide rule, and the raw, exhausted capacity of his own brain. The bunker went silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lamps and the scratching of the graphite on the page. Vance worked backwards, running the numbers through the derived addition table, the key he had risked his life and sanity to find. His eyes burned. He felt the pressure behind his forehead intensifying, a physical ache as he forced his mind to hold thousands of variables in suspension. The raw numbers dissolved. The groups resolved themselves into Japanese phonetics. Then, rapidly, Vance translated the kanji into English, writing the words down with speed and increasing dread. First line, Task Force 18 moving to position X-ray. Standard, confirmation of the Midway movement. Second line, prepare K-Force for coastal insertion. Standard invasion preparatory detail. Vance paused, his hand shaking. He looked at the third and fourth lines. They were encrypted using a secondary layered system, an extra precaution reserved only for the highest level of communication. The kind of message that meant the Supreme Command was moving its final pieces. He worked faster now, desperation overriding exhaustion. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded his mouth. He threw the pencil down, snatching the slide rule. The thin piece of glass moved smoothly over the calibrated wood. 5163. The numbers clicked into place, the translation solidified. It was crude, clipped, almost arrogant in its brevity. The message read, "If resistance is met, Protocol Shometsu is authorized. Total saturation of target asset." Vance stared at the word. Shometsu. Annihilation, extinction. But the real threat was the last phrase. Target asset. This wasn't just about Midway. The main Imperial plan was not just to draw the American fleet out. It was a trap built around a specific secondary target. Something vital. Something the Japanese command believed was worth losing carriers over. He knew what the target asset was. He had suspected it for weeks. It wasn't oil, it wasn't land, it was the intelligence network itself. The enemy suspected an American presence on the outer islands, a listening post, a place the codes might be leaking. If the Japanese found that post, they would wipe it out. And if they found the source of the leak, Vance's secret, the fact that he had broken JN-25, would be revealed regardless of his careful, terrible lies. The true dilemma snapped into focus. If he diverted the fleet to intercept the carriers at Midway, he saved the strategic asset. But the secondary fleet, the K-Force, would slip through the chaos and obliterate the listening post. If the listening post was annihilated, the Japanese would change the code. Vance would win the Battle of Midway, only to lose the entire war. The weapon would be rendered useless. He had to save the secret, even if it meant risking the immediate battle. He had to protect the source of his knowledge. But doing that meant letting the Japanese carriers move further into the Pacific, unchallenged for crucial hours. It meant risking the entire American counterattack. Vance pressed his hands over his eyes, rubbing grit into the sockets. The ceiling fan whirred futilely above him. He was the single point of failure, the only man in the world who understood the true threat, the only man capable of manipulating the battlefield to protect the secret of the cipher. He had to choose which force to neutralize first. He had to choose which part of the war he would lose immediately in order to guarantee the long war. The choice had to look like a mistake. It had to look like a gamble based on incomplete, circumstantial evidence. Ellis cleared his throat from the doorway. "Major, the Admiral is demanding confirmation on the main fleet deployment by 0300. He needs the intercept correlation report now." "Where are the carriers going?" The air was thick, suffocating. Vance lowered his hands. His eyes were wide, focused on a point far beyond the bunker walls. He had the names of the men on the listening post. He had seen their deployment manifest. Young, scared men stationed on a forgotten strip of coral. Men he was about to sign their death warrants, but if he saved them, the entire decryption operation failed. Vance picked up the pencil, his hands steadying now, channeling the cold, ruthless mathematics. The personal horror was walled off. Only the calculation remained. He had to give the Admiral coordinates that were slightly, deliberately wrong. Coordinates that would delay the main fleet just long enough for the listening post to send out one final, crucial signal before they were erased from the map. It was necessary chaos. It was the cost of the unbreakable weapon. "Tell the Admiral," Vance said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "that my report indicates a feint, a distraction." He looked at the fatal message, the code he had broken, and wrote out the intentional misinformation. "Tell him the main attack is shifting to the south. And tell him," Vance leaned forward, his eyes glinting under the harsh light, "that we have to be prepared to lose everything to prove we knew nothing at all." The game had begun. The war was now a fragile structure of calculated deception. And Major Elias Vance, America's most critical, dangerous asset, had just signed his first execution order. He woke to the ringing silence, not the absence of sound, but the crushing weight of silence after the shells stopped. His ears bled. He could taste the copper tang of his own blood mixing with the dust. The island was a graveyard, not neat rows of crosses, but shattered palm trees and broken bodies piled in the sand. Tarawa. A name that meant nothing until you were dying on it. Now it meant everything. The Higgins boat had grounded too far out. They had waded through water that was chest-high, then waist-high, then ankle-deep in sticky, churning gore. The smell was pure rot, metal, and shit, a sweet, sickening perfume that clung to their uniforms. The Japanese machine guns had fired from bunkers carved deep into the coral, enfilade fire, a perfect, murderous crossfire. It shredded the first 3 waves. Men just dissolved. They stepped off the ramp and became mist. He was Private First Class John Rourke. 18 years old. Now he felt 80. He clutched his rifle, the cold metal slick with sweat. He was pinned down behind a half-destroyed amphibious tractor, the engine casing still smoking. The noise of battle returned, not a distant roar, but a close, vicious snapping sound. Rifles, mortars. The problem was the position. They were trapped, flanked by unbreachable concrete pillboxes. They couldn't advance, they couldn't retreat. The tide was coming in. Soon they would drown where they lay, or be chewed apart by steel. They needed fire. Heavy fire. Something that could punch through 6 feet of reinforced concrete. The naval bombardment had failed. It had only angered the enemy, stirring them up like hornets. Rourke looked left. Sergeant Miller was staring blankly at the sky. A bullet had punched a neat hole through his helmet right above the brim. Miller wasn't dead. He was just gone, his eyes wide, fixed on a point beyond the battle. Shock. Rourke crawled forward, scraping his elbows raw on the coral. He saw a shape moving 50 yards ahead, low to the ground. A Marine, maybe Captain Davies. Davies was screaming, not in pain, but in sheer, cold fury. "We need the thing!" Davies roared, his voice cracking. "Where is the goddamn thing?" The thing was the experimental weapon, the Browning automatic rifle, the bar. America had almost shelved it. Too heavy, they said, too complicated, hard to manufacture. General Staff wanted the M1 Garand, the elegant 8-shot rifle. The bar was a relic of the Great War, a lumbering beast of a machine. It weighed 20 pounds loaded. It fired the same .30-06 round as the Garand, but it did not load from a clip. It fed from a 20-round box magazine. It was designed for walking fire, a full auto rifle for a man who needed to keep moving. In the tight, brutal confines of island warfare, speed was life. But logistics had botched the delivery. The new bars, the ones with the improved rate of fire and heat shielding, were stuck somewhere in Pearl Harbor. What they had were the old M19 18A2 models. Slow, heavy. And Davies knew. He knew that their fate rested on a weapon that bureaucracy had tried to erase. Rourke spotted the gun. It was lying beside a shredded backpack, its barrel buried slightly in the bloody sand. Its owner, Private Sanchez, was slumped over it, his chest cavity a mess of ruined fabric and bone. Rourke took a breath. A short, shallow one. He tasted blood and saltpeter. He had to cross 15 feet of open sand to get it, 15 feet that the Japanese snipers had zeroed perfectly. He thought of his mother's kitchen, the scent of baking bread. The sharp, bitter reality of Tarawa pulled him back. He sprinted. The moment he broke cover, the world exploded. The sound was deafening. Zzzt. The bullets were whipping past him, close enough to feel the pressure wave. He was not running toward the bar. He was running toward death. He dove, hitting the sand hard, driving the air from his lungs. His vision grayed out. The coral felt like razor wire. He slid into the dead man, Sanchez. He wrestled the bar free. It was heavy, brutally, reassuringly heavy. He dragged himself back behind the half-track, hugging the weapon close. "Rourke, you got it, you crazy bastard!" Davies screamed. Rourke checked the magazine. It was full. 20 rounds of American firepower, waiting for him to pull the trigger. Davies crawled toward him. "We need to clear that pillbox, John, the one at 12 o'clock. We can't move until that gun stops singing." The pillbox was 40 yards away, a solid block of concrete and ingenuity. The firing slit was a dark, malicious eye. It spat death. "I need covering fire," Rourke whispered. His mouth was dry. "You've got 3 men, Rourke. That's it. Now go." Davies and the 2 remaining Marines began firing their Garands, 8 shots each. Ping, ping, ping! The distinctive metallic sound of the spent clips ejecting. They were trying to suppress the pillbox, but the M1 was not a suppressive weapon. It was an instrument of precision. They were throwing pebbles at a stone wall. Rourke had the bar. He was holding the sledgehammer. He rose slowly. He didn't fire immediately. He waited for the rhythm of the Japanese gunner. 3 bursts, a pause, 3 more bursts. The pauses were short. Seconds. When the enemy gun stopped for its next reload, Rourke stepped into the open. He felt exposed, naked. The sun beat down, turning the sand into shimmering glass. He sighted the bar. The old iron sights were true. He aimed low, directly at the narrow firing slit, and pulled the trigger. The recoil was immense. The bar roared. It was not the crack of a rifle. It was the sustained, vibrating thump-thump-thump of a machine. The gun hammered against his shoulder, driving him backward, but he held the line. He didn't fire a single bullet. He fired a stream. He emptied the entire magazine, 20 rounds, into that small concrete aperture. The noise was staggering. It felt like the ground itself was shaking. He heard the bullets striking stone, tearing into the metal shield, and then a horrible, wet screaming sound from inside the bunker. He dropped the empty magazine, fumbling in his vest for a fresh one. His hands were shaking violently. He slapped the new magazine home, chambered around. Silence. The pillbox had stopped firing. It was a deep, meaningful silence. The other Marines stopped shooting, looking up, disbelief etched on their faces. "Again, Rourke!" Davies yelled, energized by the silence. "Hit the next one!" The next bunker to the right was spitting tracer fire at the remnants of their flank. Rourke took a deep breath. His heart was hammering the inside of his ribs. He used the new technique. Walk into the open. Aim. Empty the magazine. Suppress the enemy with a deluge of steel. He did it again. 15 yards closer this time. He emptied the second magazine into the new bunker. The firing slit dissolved. The screams came instantly. It was not a rifle. It was a fire hose of pure destruction. It was the power of continuous, full auto fire, focused on a single point. It was what the Japanese had not planned for. Their defenses were built to withstand artillery strikes, not 20 heavy rifle rounds impacting the exact same spot at close range, chewing through the steel plate. The weight, the complexity, the perceived obsolescence. It did not matter. In the face of entrenched desperation, the bar was unstoppable. It was the perfect weapon for the impossible task. The ability to suppress, to force the enemy's head down, and to instantly change the local balance of fire superiority. Rourke was firing the third magazine now. He was moving, walking forward, sweeping the weapon, letting the heavy barrel trace a deadly path along the beach line. The rest of the Marines rose, encouraged, stunned, following the advancing wall of lead that Rourke was creating. The bar was chewing up the wire, kicking up coral dust, and most importantly, silencing the guns. He reached the first pillbox. A dark stain spread rapidly beneath the firing slit. He could hear the low, pitiful moaning. Davies caught up to him. He was grinning through a mask of filth and powder. "You just opened the door, Rourke. You just gave us the beach." Rourke didn't answer. His ears were still ringing. His shoulder ached, bruised deep by the recoil. He felt a profound exhaustion, but also a terrifying, focused clarity. The panic had burned away, replaced by the instinct to simply keep the heavy, beautiful weapon running. They had almost thrown it away. They had almost left this beast sitting on a desk in Washington. Now it was the key. It was the only reason any of them were still alive. The island fought back. A mortar shell landed 50 yards down the beach. The air shrieked. But the tide had turned. The wedge had been driven. Rourke reloaded the bar. 20 more rounds, 20 more chances to survive. He looked inland, toward the main bunkers, toward the heart of the resistance. The next 100 yards would be worse, but now they had the voice of defiance. They had the heavy, sustained, uncompromising roar of the Browning automatic rifle, and they were going to use it to pay the enemy back for every single death. The battle for Tarawa was just beginning, but the beachhead, which had seemed impregnable only minutes before, was breached by one man, and a weapon that refused to die. The cold was not the worst part. The cold was familiar. The worst part was the sound of the silence that followed the gunfire. Sergeant Major Knox tasted copper. He did not know if it was his blood or the dust kicked up from the ruined factory floor. He only knew the weight of the steel in his hands. It was the final room, the last pocket of resistance. The walls were pulverized concrete, stripped of any color. Smoke hung thick, a chemical fog that stung the eyes and burned the throat. There were 4 men left, against 30, maybe more. This was the close range the brass hated, the distance where doctrine died. Knox braced the steel against his shoulder, not the slick, high-quality precision tool of the generals. This was the weapon they tried to throw away. The ugly truth stamped from cheap metal, built to spit fire and oil and nothing else. It was meant for mechanics, for truck drivers, not for frontline fury. But here, in the rubble, it was life. He gripped the flat receiver. He felt the heat radiating off the barrel. The weapon pulsed, a living thing, a flicker of movement, a shadow dissolving into the oily blackness by the stacked crates. Knox did not aim. He pointed. Instinct took over. The machine hammered. Not the refined crack of the Garand. This was a sustained, rapid, rattling thump, 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 a dirty sound, a sound of desperation. The weapon's velocity was low, but its rate of fire was brutal. It punched holes into the crate, into the wall, and into the man behind the wall. He walked the fire. The barrel jumped violently in his hands. Empty shells sprayed out, hot brass ticking against the concrete. It was done in 3 seconds. The corner was clear. But the enemy knew their number now. They heard the distinctive savage sound of the cheap gun. They knew the Americans were cornered. Knox sucked air. It tasted like ash and burnt cordite. A grenade rolled across the floor, slow and mocking. "Down!" Knox screamed. The world dissolved into concussion. The pressure wave hit him like a physical fist, slamming his helmet against the ground. The ringing was immediate, high-pitched, permanent. He crawled through the dust. He could no longer feel his left arm. The pain was secondary. The priority was the steel, the ammunition. He reached his pouch. His fingers were shaking, slick with sweat and grime. He pulled out the final magazine. 28 rounds. That was the equation of survival. He slammed the fresh magazine home. The sound was a loud, hollow clack in the ringing silence. The Germans rushed the opening. They shouted in a language Knox no longer registered, only the tone of lethal certainty. He stood up. He steadied the cheap gun with his good hand, anchoring it against his hip. This was not strategy. This was survival, distilled to its purest, most brutal form. He squeezed the trigger. The weapon roared, a constant ugly symphony of deliverance. He held the trigger down, emptying the entire magazine into the oncoming wave. The brass poured out. The smell of oil and fresh gunpowder choked the room. They went down, all of them. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was absolute. The ringing in his ears intensified. Knox stood alone in the center of the carnage. Then the final sharp pain, a dull, sickening thud against his chest. It was not a clean shot. It was a fragment, a stray round ricocheting off the machinery. It punctured the steel of his cheap weapon, deflected and struck him hard, just above the plate. He didn't fall immediately. He stood there, watching the smoke curl, feeling the hot rush of breath leaving him. The pain was deep, spreading outward like cold water. His vision tunneled. He looked down at the gun, the M3, the weapon the procurement officers called trash, the steel they deemed too soft. It was cracked now, the receiver bent where the round had struck it. But it had emptied the magazine. It had done its job. Knox sank to his knees. The cold concrete accepted him. He was not thinking about victory or country. He thought only about the simple, metallic perfection of that last burst. The moment of absolute clarity, when man and machine were one single, effective, brutal tool. He closed his eyes. The light of the ruined factory faded. The fighting moved on. The war machine, immense and indifferent, rolled over that single ruined room in the heart of Germany. Knox did not survive the morning. He died in the dust, next to the weapon he proved necessary. A man of the line, erased by the logistics of the war he helped win. But the evidence remained, the grim arithmetic of the dead surrounding him, the undeniable statistical truth. The reports filtered back. The combat efficiency data was clear. In the close, brutal fighting of the European theatre, in the dense hedgerows, the filthy streets, the tangled wreckage of industrial cities, the cheap, despised M3 had outperformed its slicker, heavier counterparts. The numbers didn't lie. The gun was faster to produce, it was easier to maintain, and critically, it did the job. The initial resistance was vast. The pride of the Ordnance Corps was wounded. They saw the weapon as an insult to American manufacturing superiority. They wanted chrome. They wanted complexity. They wanted beautiful, polished steel. But war is never beautiful. War demands efficacy. The body count proved the machine was right. The body count proved Sergeant Major Knox was right. The decision was forced. The weapon that was almost thrown away, the cheap, ugly submachine gun, was finally adopted. Production skyrocketed. It became the symbol of the American close combat soldier, churning out death cheaply and effectively, saving countless lives by taking others faster. It became standard issue. It was issued to the soldiers who hated it at first, then learned to love its reliability in the tight corners of the war. They called it the grease gun, a derogatory name that became a badge of honor. Knox never knew the outcome. He never saw the final production lines churning out thousands of the weapons he championed in blood. He never heard the official reports admitting the early, arrogant error. He was just a footnote in a massive logistical shift. But his story is the history of all true battlefield innovation. It is never the bureaucracy that wins. It is never the elegant design chosen in a climate-controlled room. It is always the hungry, exhausted, desperate man in the mud. The man who takes the tool that works regardless of its pedigree. Knox's sacrifice was the price paid for expediency. He forced the American war machine to accept a brutal truth. Survival does not require complexity. It requires commitment. The generals needed 1,000 pages of data to be convinced. Knox needed 3 seconds and 1 ruined room. The weapon lived on long after the war, a silent monument to the power of necessity over vanity. It was the weapon America almost missed. The perfect answer to the wrong question. The question was never, what is the best possible weapon? The question asked in the smoke and the chaos was always, what will work right now? And the answer, forged in cheap steel and paid for with a sergeant's life, hammered home in the silence of that final room. The factory is quiet now. The rust eats the metal. The dust settles thick over the concrete. But the echo remains. It is the harsh, ugly sound of the machine that was never supposed to be. The sound of necessity. The sound of ultimate victory